Every year has its monsters. Some years, it's the kind you read about in the news and move on. But 2025 was different. 2025 was the year. The things that were supposed to protect you started being used against you. The technology in your pocket, the voice of someone you love, the home you thought was locked. These are 10 of the scariest true stories submitted to me this year. I read hundreds of submissions. These are the ones I couldn't stop thinking about. As always, names and identifying details have been changed at the request of those involved. Let's get into it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sandra's phone rang. She picked up, and immediately she knew something was wrong. It was her daughter crying, barely able to get the words out. "Mom, I was in an accident. I lost the baby. Mom, I'm going to jail if you don't help me right now." Sandra didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She recognized her daughter's voice. Every mother knows that sound, the specific pitch of her child in real distress. The way she said, "Mom," the second time. The trembling. A man came on the line next. He said he was a lawyer. He said her daughter needed $15,000 in cash within the hour, or she was going to be arraigned. Sandra drove to the bank. She withdrew the money. She put it in a box. A courier arrived at her door within 30 minutes and took it. Then she called her daughter to tell her the money was on its way. Her daughter answered on the second ring. Confused, safe, at work, hadn't been in any accidents. Sandra had spent 45 minutes on the phone with a voice she was completely certain was her daughter's. It wasn't. It was an AI-generated clone, built from videos her daughter had posted online, capable of mimicking not just her voice, but her emotional patterns. The way she cried, the specific words she used when scared. The money was never recovered. This was sent to me by a guy I'll call Marcus. He was living alone in a third-floor apartment in a mid-sized city. He'd been there 2 years. Quiet building, quiet neighbors, quiet life. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. That changed in January. He was coming back from the laundry room on a Wednesday evening, basket under his arm, earphones in, when a hand touched his shoulder from behind. He spun around. An older man was standing in the hallway, maintenance uniform, maybe 60 years old. Marcus had seen him around the building before, but never spoken to him. He had the look of someone who'd worked the same job for 30 years and had stopped being surprised by anything. Except right now, he looked surprised. He glanced toward the stairwell, then back at Marcus. Then he stepped closer and dropped his voice to just above a whisper. "Don't answer your door at 2:13 in the morning." Marcus stared at him. "What?" "It doesn't matter how normal the knock sounds. It doesn't matter if you think you recognize the voice. Don't answer it." Marcus said. He almost laughed. It was such a strange thing to say in a hallway on a Wednesday night. He asked the man what he meant. What was at 2:13? Why that specific time? What was he talking about? The maintenance worker just looked at him. Not with fear exactly. With something heavier than fear. The look of someone who has already processed something terrible and come out the other side of it into a flat, quiet certainty. He said, "Because whoever it is, they already know you're home." Then he picked up his toolbox and walked toward the stairwell and was gone before Marcus could say another word. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment holding his laundry basket. Then he went inside, locked his door, and told himself the man was probably just strange. Old building, odd characters. He didn't think about it again. That was a Wednesday. On Saturday night, technically Sunday morning, Marcus woke up. He didn't know why at first. No sound. No dream he could remember. Just suddenly awake, lying in the dark, with the specific feeling that something had changed in the air around him. He reached for his phone. 2:13 a.m. He stared at the screen. Then it came. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Each one separated by a pause just long enough to feel intentional. Not the urgent knock of someone in an emergency. Not the casual knock of a neighbor who needs something. Measured. Patient. like whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world. Marcus said he didn't move. He was sitting up in bed, and he just stopped. Every instinct he had told him not to make a sound, not to turn on a light, not to do anything that would confirm he was awake. He sat in the dark and waited. 30 seconds passed. Maybe a minute. He lost track. Then 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same patience. He said the worst part was the silence between them. Because in that silence, he kept thinking, is someone pressing their ear against my door right now? Are they listening for me the same way I'm listening for them? He didn't move for a long time. Eventually, he heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried, moving away down the corridor. No rush, no frustration, just someone leaving the way they came, as if this had gone exactly the way they expected. Marcus sat in the dark until he heard the stairwell door at the end of the hall open and close. Then he turned on every light in his apartment and didn't sleep again. In the morning, he went straight to the building manager's office and described the maintenance worker, the uniform, the age, the conversation in the hallway on Wednesday night. The building manager looked at him for a moment. Then she told him they hadn't sent anyone to the 3rd floor that week. She pulled up the maintenance schedule on her computer and turned the screen toward him. Nothing. No work orders, no scheduled visits, no reason for any maintenance worker to have been on his floor at all. Marcus asked if there was any way someone could have gotten into the building in a uniform without being authorized. She said the front entrance had a camera. They pulled the footage from Wednesday evening, the time Marcus estimated he'd been in the hallway. The camera showed Marcus coming back from the laundry room. He was alone in the hallway. There was no one behind him. There was no one who touched his shoulder. Marcus moved out of that apartment within the month. He never got an explanation. He still has no idea who knocked on his door that night, or how many other doors they knocked on, or what would have happened if he'd answered. He said the thing he thinks about most even now is the specific time. Not 2 a.m., not 2:30, 2:13. Whoever told me not to open the door knew the exact minute, which means they'd seen it happen before, which means it had happened to someone else in that building. And that person, whoever they were, I don't know their name. I don't know what floor they were on. And I never found out what happened to them. A security guard I'll call Derek had worked the overnight shift at the same distribution warehouse for 3 years. Big place. Massive, actually. Rows of steel shelving stretching back further than the overhead lights could reach. Forklifts parked like sleeping animals. Loading docks along the south wall, 12 of them, each one sealed with a heavy rolling door. Outside a fenced lot, 2 acres, floodlights on poles. A single keycard access gate at the front entrance. Derek had walked that perimeter so many times he could do it in his sleep. Every crack in the asphalt. Every shadow that was supposed to be there. After 3 years, you learn what the place looks like when everything is normal. That's why he noticed. It was a Tuesday in late February. He'd started his 1 a.m. perimeter walk the same way he always did out the side door. East wall first, then south along the loading docks, then west, then back up the north side to the entrance. He made it about halfway down the south wall when the fog rolled in. Not gradually. It came off the water fast, the way it sometimes does near ports. One moment you can see to the fence line, and then you can't see your own hand at arm's length. Dense, cold, completely silent. Derek slowed down. He'd walked in fog before. He knew the route. He was maybe 30 feet from loading dock 7 when he stopped. There was a perimeter floodlight on a pole just past the dock. He could see its glow through the fog, a pale yellow smear of light in the white. And standing underneath it, completely still, was a figure. Derek said his first thought was completely rational. A colleague. Someone from the early shift who hadn't clocked out. A delivery driver who'd come through the wrong entrance. His second thought, which arrived about 2 seconds later, was that nobody should be standing that still. People fidget. People shift their weight. People look around when they're lost or waiting. This figure was standing the way a lamppost stands. Perfectly, completely motionless. Both arms at its sides. Head facing forward. Toward Derek. He called out, "Hey, hey, this is a restricted area. Identify yourself." Nothing. He unclipped his radio and called inside. His colleague, a guy named Phil who worked the interior desk, confirmed what Derek already knew. Nobody had badged through the front gate. No deliveries were scheduled until 6 a.m. No contractors, no maintenance, no reason for any living person to be standing in that lot. "You want me to call it in?" Phil asked. Derek said give him a minute. He grabbed his flashlight, a serious one, the kind that cuts actual distance, and started walking toward the figure. He said he got about 15 feet closer before something made him slow down. He couldn't explain what it was. Not a sound. Not a movement from the figure. Just a feeling that arrived in his chest and spread outward. The particular physical sensation, he described it as his body making a decision before his brain caught up, of being in the presence of something that should not be there. He kept walking. 10 feet. He raised the flashlight. The beam hit the spot directly under the floodlight. Nothing. Just wet asphalt, glistening in the light. Derek stood there, flashlight on an empty patch of ground. Fog pressing in on every side. He did a full perimeter sweep. Took him 22 minutes. Every corner of the fence line, every gap between the dock doors, every shadow the floodlights cast. Nothing. No footprints in the wet ground. No disturbed gravel near the fence. No indication that any person had walked in or out of that lot. He went back inside and pulled up the CCTV system. The warehouse had 11 external cameras covering the lot. He went to the one covering the south perimeter, the sector he'd been walking. It had gone offline at exactly 12:58 a.m. It came back online at 1:07 a.m. 9 minutes. He pulled up the other. 10 cameras to see if any of them had caught the south lot from a different angle during those 9 minutes. 3 of them had also malfunctioned. All 3 going dark within 30 seconds of each other. All 3 coming back. Online within 40 seconds of each other. All of them covering different sections of the same south and west perimeter. Derek sat at the desk for a long time looking at the timestamps. Then he pulled up the maintenance logs to see when the cameras had last malfunctioned before that night. He scrolled back through 6 months of logs. He found one previous entry. The cameras had gone down before. Same sector. Same approximate duration. 8 months earlier. On a night Derek hadn't been working. He found the name of the guard who'd been on shift that night and called him the next morning. The man picked up. Derek explained what had happened and asked if the other guard. We remembered anything unusual from that shift 8 months ago. A figure in the fog. Anything outside. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the man said, "I put in my notice the next day. I haven't thought about that place since." Derek asked him what he saw. Another silence. "I saw it walk through the fence," he said. "Not through the gate. Through the fence. Like the fence wasn't there, and then it just stood there. In the light. Looking back at me." Derek asked him what it looked like. The man said, "It looked like someone who knew they had time." Then he hung up. Derek finished out his shift that night and handed in his notice the following week. He told me he's thought about those 9 minutes every single day since. Not because of what he saw, because of what the other guard said. It looked like someone who knew they had time. Because the thing that keeps Derek awake at night, the thing he can't reason his way out of, is that the cameras went down before he even stepped outside. Whoever, whatever was standing in that fog, it knew he was coming. An EMT I'll call Renata had been doing the job for 6 years. 6 years of overnight shifts. 6 years of walking into houses where something had gone wrong. 6 years of learning how to look at the worst moments of people's lives and keep moving, because that's what the job requires. She told me she's good at it. She said it without pride, just as a fact. The same way a surgeon might tell you they've learned not to flinch. You build a wall between what you see and what you feel, and you maintain that wall, and you go home, and you sleep, and you come back the next shift. She told me, "This is the one where the wall didn't hold." It was a Thursday, deep into the overnight around 2 a.m. She got dispatched to assist two local police officers on a welfare check. An elderly man living alone in a residential neighborhood. Neighbors hadn't seen him in 4 days. His mail was piling up on the front step. The lights in the house hadn't changed, same lamp on in the same window, day after day, the way a house looks when no one is home. But no one turned anything off before they left. They arrived at the property just after 2 a.m. Small house, single story, quiet street, no other movement anywhere. The kind of neighborhood that goes completely dark and completely still at night. The kind where you can hear your own footsteps. Renata said the first thing she noticed was the dark. Not darkness dark. She said there's a difference, and after 6 years she can feel it. A house where someone is asleep is dark, but it breathes. There's a quality to it. Something alive underneath the stillness. This house had none of that. This was the dark of a place that had been empty of something essential for days. They went around the side to check the bedroom window. The officer aimed his flashlight through the glass. They could all see it clearly. A pair of legs, hanging off the edge of the bed at an angle that made no sense for someone sleeping, not moving. Not the small, subtle movement of breathing. Completely, totally motionless. The specific stillness that Renata said she recognizes now before she even consciously processes it. The stillness of something that will never move again. They knocked on the front door. Nothing. They announced themselves loudly, clearly. Nothing. They forced the garage door. The smell came out like a physical thing. Renata said she's tried many times to explain this to people, and she's never found the right words for it. It's not just unpleasant. It's not just strong. It's the kind of smell that your body responds to on a level below thought, below language. Something ancient and biological in you recognizes it immediately and responds with a single, clear message. Something here has ended. And it ended a long time ago. She said she's encountered it many times in 6 years. She knows what it means. She knows what they're going to find. She pulled her mask up and moved in behind the officers. They moved through the kitchen, through the hallway. And that's when she heard it. Laughter. Coming from somewhere ahead of them, down the hallway. In the dark. Renata said she has thought about how to describe this sound more times than she can count, and she still doesn't think she's found the right words. It wasn't laughter the way you think of laughter. It had the shape of laughter, the rhythm, the pitch, the cadence, but all the meaning had been stripped out of it. No joy, no humor, no warmth. Just the mechanical output of something that had learned to make that sound and was making it over and over, in the dark, in a house that smelled the way this house smelled. The officers drew their weapons. They started moving down the hallway, announcing themselves, and the laughter kept coming directionless at first, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it hard to locate, and then louder still as they approached the living room doorway, and then silence. Complete silence. So abrupt it felt like a physical thing. They stopped in the doorway. A parrot, in a large cage on a stand by the window, sitting perfectly still, watching them with one unblinking eye. They stood there for a moment and just looked at it. It looked back. Then it laughed again. Renata said nobody spoke for a long time. Nobody moved. She stood in a lot of difficult rooms in 6 years of this job, rooms where terrible things have happened, rooms where the air itself feels different. But she said this one was unlike anything else she's experienced, because the bird wasn't scared of them. It wasn't reacting to them. It wasn't startled by the flashlights or the voices or the drawn weapons. It was just doing what it had been doing. In that room, in that house, for 4 days. The man had been dead since Sunday. The coroner's estimate put it at roughly 96 hours before they arrived. 4 days of the house going dark, the mail piling up, the neighbors getting worried. 4 days of the bird in its cage. 4 days of whatever sounds it heard in those first hours before the silence settled in. Before the house became the house Renata walked into. Renata said she was standing in the living room looking at the cage when she started doing the math she didn't want to do. Parrots are mimics. Everyone knows that. They hear sounds in their environment and they reproduce them. They practice sounds. They get better at sounds over time. The laugh the bird was producing was not a simple sound. It was layered. It had texture to it. It had what she could only describe as detail-specific catches and rhythms that didn't sound like a generic laugh, that sounded like a specific laugh, a particular person's laugh. And the man's laugh had been in this house for years, but that wasn't what stopped her. What stopped her was the question she didn't want to ask and couldn't stop herself from asking. The man had been alive when this started. There were hours, however many hours, between when he collapsed or fell or whatever had happened in that bedroom, and the moment he stopped making any sounds at all. Hours in which the bird was in this room. Hours in which sounds happened in this house. Hours in which the bird sat in its cage and listened, the way parrots do, cataloging, memorizing, adding to the library of sounds it carries. She looked at the bird. She thought about that laugh. The specific quality of it, the way it sounded, practiced, the way it sounded like it had been performed many times over 4 days in an empty house to an audience of no one. She thought about what sounds a person makes in a room where something is going wrong. The sounds they make when they're confused, when they're frightened, when they're trying to call out and no one comes. The sounds of a person alone in a house at the end of something. What had the bird heard? What had it filed away in those first hours, in the dark, while the house was still warm? What was it practicing, alone, in the silence that followed? She asked one of the officers to cover the cage. He took a blanket from the couch and draped it over. The bird went quiet. The house went quiet. Renata said she stood there in the quiet for a long moment and realized something she hasn't been able to unrealize since. The silence was worse. Because in the silence, she became aware of a new thought, one that arrived quietly and then refused to leave. The bird had been silent when they first entered the house. She replayed it now, standing in the covered room. They had forced the garage door. They had moved through the kitchen. They had moved into the hallway. And the laughter had started when they were about halfway down the hallway. Not immediately. Not when they entered. Not when the light first came through the windows, or when the cold air from outside moved through the house. When they were halfway down the hallway, as if whatever was in that cage had heard them at a certain distance, had tracked their approach, and at a specific moment had decided to respond. She said she drove home at 6 a.m. and sat in her car in her driveway, and didn't get out for a long time. She filed her report. She came back the next shift. She has continued to do this job because she's good at it and because people need it done. But she told me she can't be in a room with a bird anymore. Any bird. She said she knows intellectually that it's irrational, that other birds in other houses have nothing to do with what she found that night, that there is no logical reason for her to feel the way she feels when she hears the particular bright sound of a bird in an enclosed space. She knows all of that. It's not the laugh itself that I hear when I'm trying to sleep, she said. It's the question, the one I can't answer and can't stop asking. She looked at me. Parrots learn sounds from the things around them, from the environment, from what they hear in the place they live. That bird had been in that house for years. It had learned that man's voice, his laugh, the sounds he made every day. But what I keep asking myself, what I cannot stop asking, is whether it learned anything new in those last hours. Whether there are sounds in that bird now that weren't there before Sunday. And whether, if you sat with it long enough in the quiet, it would show you what it heard. She didn't say anything after that. Neither did I. A woman I'll call Priya had traveled alone for years. She was not someone who scared easily, not the type to check under the bed or leave the bathroom light on. She'd stayed in hotels alone, hostels alone, Airbnbs alone in cities she'd never been to before. She had a system. She knew what to look for. Bad reviews hidden in the middle of good ones. Hosts who responded too slowly or too eagerly. Listings where the photos were shot at an angle that avoided showing the windows, or the locks, or the street outside. She was good at reading listings. She'd been doing it for years, and she'd never had a problem. This listing had a 4.9-star rating, 62 reviews, all recent, all positive. Phrases like exactly as described, and felt completely safe, and would definitely stay again. The host had superhost status, which requires consistent high ratings over a sustained period. The listing description opened with a single clear sentence. Entire home just for you. She booked it for a solo work trip. 2 nights. She arrived on a Friday evening around 10 p.m., let herself in with the lockbox code, and did what she always does, a full walkthrough before she unpacked anything. Every room. Every closet. Every window latch. She checked the locks on the front and back doors. Confirmed the Wi-Fi password matched the listing. Looked in the bathroom cabinet out of habit. Nothing unusual. Everything exactly as the photo showed. Clean, modest, well-maintained. A quiet residential street. The kind of neighborhood where you could hear if a car drove past. She unpacked, answered some emails, went to bed around midnight. She woke up at 1:47 a.m. She was certain of the time because she looked at her phone immediately, the way you do when something wakes you and you're trying to orient yourself. The screen said 1:47. She lay still in the dark and tried to identify what had woken her. No sound she could name. No noise from the street. The house was completely quiet. She lay there for a minute, maybe 2, and heard nothing and felt nothing she could point to. She was almost asleep again when she noticed the smell. Faint. Cigarette smoke. Not fresh, not the sharp, immediate smell of someone actively smoking, but the old, settled smell that lives in walls and upholstery and curtains when someone has been smoking in a space for years. The smell that no amount of cleaning fully removes. The smell that comes out of the surfaces at night when the house is warm and closed. The listing had said non-smoking property. She got up. She went through every room methodically, the way she did her initial walkthrough. Bedroom, hallway, living room, bathroom. The smell was present everywhere, and stronger nowhere. Diffuse. Like it was coming from inside the walls, rather than from any specific point. She couldn't locate a source. She stood in the living room for a moment. Quiet house. 1:52 a.m. by now. She decided it was probably coming from a neighboring property. Old construction, shared walls, someone next door who smoked. A reasonable explanation. She went to the kitchen to get a glass of water before going back to bed. She was at the sink when she looked at the door. It was at the back of the kitchen, beside the refrigerator, flush with the wall. Plain wood, no different from the other interior doors in the house, except that it was slightly narrower. She had registered it during her walkthrough and filed it away as a pantry or a utility closet, the kind of door that leads somewhere boring and unimportant. There was a thin line of light under it. She stood at the fixtory, sink with the glass in her hand, and looked at it. Pale, faint, the kind of light that could be almost anything, a power strip, LED, a router, a carbon monoxide detector, any of the dozen small electronic things that glow in modern houses. She stood there and looked at it, and did not move toward it. She told me she's thought a lot about why she didn't move toward it. She's a practical person. She doesn't startle easily. Under normal circumstances, she would have opened that door without hesitation, confirmed it was a utility closet with some blinking device inside, and gone back to bed. She said something stopped her. Not a sound. not a movement. Something she couldn't name, a quality in the air of the kitchen, or in the silence of the house at that moment, or in something she had registered without knowing she'd registered it. She stood at the sink and looked at the line of light and did not move. And then the light went out. Not gradually, not a flicker, just gone. As if whatever was producing it had been turned off or covered. Priya set her glass down very carefully on the counter, walked back to the bedroom, got into bed, and pulled the covers up. She told herself it was a router. Routers cycle. They reset in the night and their lights change. She told herself this clearly and calmly and deliberately, the way you tell yourself something when part of you already knows it isn't true. She lay in the dark and listened to the house. It was quiet, completely quiet. She lay there for a long time. At some point, she fell asleep. In the morning, she got up, made coffee, and stood in the kitchen and looked at the door in the daylight. In the daylight, it looked like what she'd thought it was. Plain, ordinary. A pantry door. She reached out and tried the handle. The door didn't move. She looked more carefully. There was a deadbolt on the door, not on her side. There was no lock mechanism visible from the kitchen, no keyhole, no thumb turn, no latch. The lock was on the other side of the door. On whatever was on the other side of that door. The door could be locked and unlocked from that side, and from that side only. She stood in the kitchen and looked at it for a long moment. Then she got her phone and opened the Airbnb listing. 22 photographs. She went through every single one. Bedroom, bathroom, living room. The small back room they described as an office. The kitchen, she found the kitchen photo and expanded it on her screen and looked carefully at every detail. The section of wall beside the refrigerator. In the photo, it was blank. No door, just wall, with a small framed print on it that she hadn't noticed because it wasn't there in real life. The door wasn't in any of the photographs. The door had been removed from the photographs. She checked out within 20 minutes. She filed a report with the platform and then filed a separate report with local police. The investigation took about 2 weeks. What they found was this: directly below the kitchen, accessed by a staircase behind that door, was a fully finished basement apartment, separate from the main unit in every meaningful way. Its own entrance through a door on the exterior of the house that was hidden from the street by a fence and a row of bushes. Its own electrical panel, its own heating system, a bedroom, a bathroom, a small kitchen along one wall, a fully livable space. The host had been renting it out simultaneously on a separate listing, a different profile, different photographs, different name to a second guest. At the same time as Priya was upstairs, the investigators confirmed that someone had been in the basement unit on the night Priya stayed. They confirmed that the basement guest had checked in before Priya arrived and checked out. The morning after she left, they could not confirm, and told Priya they likely never would be able to confirm exactly what had happened at 1:47 a.m. Whether the person downstairs had come to the bottom of that staircase and stood at the door, whether they had turned a light on and then turned it off, whether they had heard Priya moving around above them and gone still and quiet and waited. What they could confirm was the layout of the space. The basement bedroom was directly below the kitchen. The ceiling of the basement was the floor of the kitchen. In old construction like this, Priya's investigator told her, sound travels clearly between floors. Footsteps, movement, voices. Everything that happens in the kitchen is audible in the room below. Priya sat with that for a long time. She sat with the image of herself standing at the sink at 1:52 a.m., holding a glass of water, looking at a line of light. And directly below her feet, separated from her by a few inches of old wood and plaster, another person, standing in their room, or sitting, or lying in their bed listening to her footsteps move across their ceiling. hearing everything. She told me she has gone over those hours many times. The walkthrough when she arrived, the rooms she checked, the window latches, the door she had registered and filed away as unimportant. She had done everything right. She had checked everything she knew to check. That's what I keep coming back to, she said. I have a system. I've used it for years. I know what to look for. But you can only look for the things you know to look for. And I didn't know to look for a door that wasn't in the photos. I didn't know to look for a door that locked from the other side. She paused. And I keep thinking if I hadn't noticed the light, if I'd gotten my water and gone straight back to bed, I wouldn't have known there was a door at all. I would have slept through the night. I would have checked out in the morning and left a 5-star review and moved on. And I never would have known. How many people did? She said that's the question she can't shake. Not what happened that night. Not who was in the basement or what they did or didn't do. How many people stayed in that house before her? How many people slept above that basement apartment without knowing it existed? How many 5-star reviews were written by people who never noticed the door, who slept through the night and left in the morning and had no idea? She looked at the 62 reviews, all recent, all positive. Felt completely safe, she said quietly. How many of them were in that house while someone was directly below them? How many of them never knew? And then she said the last thing, the thing she told me she wishes she was. Didn't think about. I woke up at 1:47 a.m. Something woke me. I still don't know what. But whoever was in that basement, they were awake at 1:47 a.m. too. They heard me get up. They heard me walk to the kitchen. They heard me stand at the sink. They heard everything. And they turned their light off, which means they didn't want me to see it. Which means at 1:47 a.m., in the dark, in a house where I thought I was completely alone, someone made a decision about me, and I still don't know what it was. A college junior I'll call Jess was driving home alone on a Saturday night, about an hour from her university, back to her parents' house. She'd made the drive a dozen times. Interstate most of the way, then a stretch of rural road at the end. She was about 20 minutes in when her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced at it at a red light. An Apple notification. The AirTag icon. AirTag detected moving with you. She pulled into the next lit parking lot, a gas station, open, other cars, and locked her doors. She called her roommate and put her on speaker. Her roommate told her to check everything. She went through her bag methodically. Every pocket, every compartment, nothing. She checked under the seats, the glove compartment, the gap between the seat and the console, the trunk, nothing. She was sitting back in the driver's seat, telling her roommate she couldn't find it when she looked down at her coat. She slid her hand into the inner pocket. Empty. She started to pull her hand out. Then she felt the seam. The inner lining had been carefully opened along one edge and restitched, slightly thicker than the original stitching. Someone had opened the lining, placed something inside, and sewn it back up. She worked her finger into the gap. A small white disc. She sat in that gas station parking lot holding it and shaking. Police were called. A detective came to the scene. What they told her over the following days was worse than finding it. The AirTag had been active for 16 days. 16 days of her life on that device's location history. Her university. Her apartment. Her workplace. A coffee shop 2 blocks from campus. The running route she took every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Every grocery store. Every friend's house. Every late-night drive. And her parents' home. In the history multiple times. The coat was secondhand. She'd bought it at a thrift store 6 weeks earlier. The detective told her the AirTag had likely been placed in the lining before the coat was donated, meaning someone had donated a coat with a tracker sewn inside it and waited for someone to buy it. Whether it was targeted at Jess specifically, or whether the coat was a net cast wide, they don't know. What they know is that for 16 days, Someone opened an app and watched a dot move around a map of Jess's life. They watched her drive the route she was driving that night. 14 times. They knew the interstate. They knew the exit. They knew the stretch of rural road at the end. They had never done anything. That's what the detective kept coming back to. 16 days of surveillance and no approach, no contact, no incident, which in some ways, the detective told her, is more concerning than if they had. Jess said the thing she can't stop thinking about is simple. She almost didn't stop at that gas station. She almost told herself it was a glitch, a false notification, somebody else's device. She almost kept driving, down the interstate, off the exit, onto the rural road, in the dark, alone. I think about that a lot, she said. The version of that night where I don't stop. A woman I'll call Teresa had worked the overnight stocking shift at a 2 4-hour Walmart for 2 years. She liked it. Genuinely liked it. She wants me to make that clear. Because she said people always assume overnight retail work is miserable. And for her, it wasn't. The store at 3 a.m. is a completely different environment from the store at 3 p.m. No announcements over the intercom, no carts blocking the aisle, no one asking you where something is every 4 minutes. Just the hum of the refrigeration units and the sound of boxes being broken down and the quiet rhythm of work that she found genuinely satisfying. She knew that store the way you know a place you've spent thousands of hours in. She knew which fluorescent light in aisle 3 flickered when the temperature dropped. She knew which section of the produce floor squeaked under a certain kind of shoe. She knew every shadow that was supposed to be there, and every sound the building made when it settled. She thought she knew everything that could happen in that store at 3 a.m. She was in aisle 7 on a Tuesday night in late January. Canned goods. Her job at that point in the shift was facing a simple, repetitive task that she could do almost without thinking. You reach behind the front row of products, you grab the back stock, you pull it forward so the shelf looks full for the morning customers. You work your way down the aisle in a steady rhythm. It takes concentration in a low, background way that she said she found almost meditative. She had done it 1,000 times. She reached behind a row of Campbell's condensed soup. Her hand closed around something that wasn't right. She said the wrongness registered in her fingers before anything else. Not the smooth, cool metal of a can. Not the waxy cardboard of a box. Something softer. Irregular in a way she couldn't immediately categorize. Yielding slightly under her grip in a way that made her hand want to let go before her brain had processed why. She pulled it out. She held it in front of her in the fluorescent light of aisle 7 and looked at it. She told me. She held it for what felt like a long time. She thinks it was 2 or 3 seconds, while her brain worked through what her eyes were sending it. The shape, the texture, the color, the specific arrangement of features that she was looking at. A cat's head, separated cleanly from the body, placed on its side. The cut was, she used the word deliberate, and then she stopped and used a different word, practiced. She said it looked practiced. The kind of clean that requires either the right tool or experience with that tool, or both. No blood on it. No blood on the shelf behind it. No blood on the Campbell's soup cans on either side. No blood anywhere in the aisle, she screamed. Her colleague from the next aisle came running. The night manager was called. Police were there within 15 minutes. She gave her statement in the break room, and she said she kept repeating the same thing to the officer, over and over, because she couldn't get past it. It was clean. The officer asked her what she meant by that. She said it hadn't been placed there fresh. You can't separate something cleanly and move it and have no blood. The preparation had happened somewhere else, at some earlier point, and then it had been transported, wrapped in something, carried in something and placed there, which meant he had come to this Walmart at this hour with it already prepared, which meant he had planned this before he left home. The cameras gave them 14 minutes of footage. He came in through the main entrance at 1:47 a.m. Gray hoodie, hood up, head at a slight downward angle, not looking at the floor, not looking at the ceiling, maintained at the specific angle that kept his face in the shadow of the hood and out of the sight line of every camera he passed. Teresa said when she watched the footage later, that's what broke her. Not the angle itself, the consistency of it. From the moment he walked through the entrance to the moment he walked out, his head never moved from that position. Not once. He didn't look up at a sign to find the aisle. He didn't glance around the way people do in unfamiliar spaces. He walked in, turned, walked directly to aisle 7, reached behind the soup cans, straightened up, and walked back out. 14 minutes total, probably 10 of those in transit. 4 minutes, maybe less, in the aisle. He didn't buy anything. He didn't slow down near anything else. He didn't look at anything that wasn't directly in his path. He came in, placed something, and left. Teresa said she's worked in retail for 6 years, and she knows what a person looks like when they're in a store for a reason versus when they're browsing. She knows hesitation. She knows the body language of someone who isn't sure where something is, or who's changed their mind, or who's forgotten what they came for. This person had none of that. He'd walked that route before, she said. Maybe not in that store, but he'd walked a version of that route before. His body knew where it was going. She paused. You don't move like that the first time you do something. They never identified him. The footage was shared with neighboring precincts. The case stayed open. Teresa checked in on it twice, 3 months apart, and was told each time there were no updates. She said she eventually stopped checking. Not because she stopped thinking about it, because of what happened 3 weeks after. She was at a friend's house, a woman. She'd known for a couple of years who worked the overnight stocking shift at a different Walmart, 40 miles north in a different city. They weren't talking about work particularly, just catching up, and Teresa mentioned what had happened because she was still processing it and it came up naturally. Her friend's expression changed. Teresa said she noticed it immediately. Not shock, her friend's face didn't register surprise. It registered something else. Something more like recognition. Teresa asked what was wrong. Her friend was quiet for a moment. Then she said that about 6 months ago, 6 months before Teresa's incident, one of the overnight stalkers at her store had found something. In aisle 12, behind the canned goods. Teresa stared at her. She asked what it was. Her friend said they had been told not to talk about it. That management had asked them, had strongly asked them, she said, with a particular emphasis on the word strongly, not to discuss it with anyone outside the store. There had been some suggestion of a company policy around incidents like this, around not causing alarm or drawing media attention. Teresa asked her again, just tell me, was it the same thing? Her friend looked at her for a long time. Then she said, I can't tell you what it was. But I can tell you that Sarah, the girl who found it, she put in her notice the next day. She won't work retail anymore. She won't go into a Walmart. She won't talk about what she found. And I can tell you that when you describe what happened to you, the way you described the cut, the way it was clean, the way there was no blood, the look on your face right now is the same look Sarah had. Teresa drove home that night and sat in her kitchen for a long time. She thought about the footage from her store, the gray hoodie, the angle of the head, the specific, practiced economy of movement of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had done something like it before. She thought about the word route. A route implies multiple stops. A route implies a beginning and an end, and points in between. A route implies that someone, somewhere, decided to do this not once, but repeatedly decided that this was a thing worth doing more than once, worth planning, worth the preparation, worth driving to a Walmart in the middle of the night with something wrapped up in a bag. She thought about the 40 miles between her store and her friend's store. She thought about how many Walmarts were open 24 hours, within 100 miles of where she was sitting. She looked it up. She won't tell me the number. She said she looked it up once, and she's never looked it up again. Because if I think about it as one person with one bad night, I can almost process it, she said. One person, one night, one decision I'll never understand. But if it's a route, if there are other stores, other nights, other stalkers who reached behind the canned goods and found something and were told not to talk about it, she stopped. Then it's not one bad night. It's a pattern. It's deliberate. It's ongoing. And the reason we don't know about it is because the stores don't want us to know about it. And if that's true, she looked at me directly then there. Our Walmart's open right now. Tonight, with stalkers in them doing the facing, working their way down the canned goods aisle, reaching behind the soup. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. A retired couple I'll call Frank and Alice had been married for 41 years. Frank told me the story himself. He said he's telling it because he wants people to understand that it can happen to anyone, that smart, careful people can be completely, utterly fooled. It was a Sunday afternoon. Alice answered Frank's phone because Frank was in the garage. She came to the garage door, and Frank could see from her face that something was wrong. She handed him the phone, and Frank heard his great-grandson Cameron's voice. Cameron was 22. Frank had known him his entire life. He said Cameron had a very specific voice, a particular rhythm to his sentences, a way of dropping his volume when he was embarrassed or scared, a specific sound he made when he was trying not to cry. The voice on the phone was doing all of those things. It said he'd been in a car accident, that his nose was broken, that he was bleeding, that he only had a few minutes before they took him away, and he needed help right now. A different man came on the line. Calm, professional, very specific bail amount, processing time, a wire transfer number, a deadline. Frank said he noticed nothing wrong. He asked questions, and the attorney had answers. He asked to speak to Cameron again, and Cameron came back on the line, his voice shakier, more frightened. Frank felt everything in him respond to that the way it always had, the specific pull of hearing someone you love in distress. He went to get his wallet. He was sitting at the kitchen table about to initiate the transfer when his cell phone rang. His actual phone, in his pocket, different from the one Alice had answered. He looked at the screen. It was Cameron. He answered. Cameron was at home. Fine. Confused. He tried calling earlier and got no answer and was just checking in. Frank sat at the kitchen table with a phone in each hand. He said he still, months later, cannot fully describe what those next few seconds felt like. The process of understanding what had just happened, of replaying the conversation and realizing that every single thing that had felt real, every inflection, every catch in the voice, every specific detail that had made it undeniably Cameron had been constructed. I've known that boy since the day he was born, Frank told me. I've heard his voice at every age. I heard it crack when he was 13. I heard it at his father's funeral. I know that voice better than I know almost any sound in the world. He stops. And I was completely fooled. Completely. If that second call hadn't come, if Cameron had tried 5 minutes later, the money would have been gone. What disturbs Frank most isn't the money. It's the detail. The voice hadn't just sounded like Cameron. It had sounded like Cameron scared. It had the specific rhythms of Cameron in distress, the specific way he sounds when something is wrong, not the way he sounds on a normal day. Which means whoever built that clone didn't just have recordings of Cameron talking. They had recordings of Cameron in emotional moments. The kind of recordings that only exist in family videos, in old voicemails, in footage people share privately with each other. Somewhere in the footage Frank's family had shared with each other over the years, birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments, someone had been collecting Cameron's voice, building a library, waiting. I don't know when they started, Frank said. But to build something that accurate to capture not just his voice, but the specific way he sounds when he's frightened, they had to have been patient. Someone was patient with us. For a long time. Before we ever knew they existed. I want to end with this one. I've read hundreds of submissions this year. I've sat with a lot of them. I've thought about most of them for longer than I'd like to admit. Some of them I've had to put down and come back to. Some of them have stayed with me in the way that certain things do, not constantly, but reliably, returning at quiet moments when there's nothing else filling the space. This is the one that changed something. Not just the way I feel, the way I think, about what's already here, and about what's coming, and about the specific kind of vulnerability that none of us have a name for yet because it's too new and we haven't caught up to it. A man I'll call David was at his desk at work on a Thursday afternoon in the spring of 2025. Ordinary day, mid-afternoon. He'd eaten lunch at his desk. He had 2 more meetings before the end of the day. His coffee had gone cold, and he hadn't bothered reheating it. The specific texture of a normal Thursday at a normal job, the kind of day you don't remember afterward because nothing happened. His phone lit up on the desk beside his keyboard. His wife's name, her number. The contact photo he'd set years ago, the one from a trip they'd taken before their son was born. He picked up and heard her voice. He told me he knew immediately that something was wrong, not because the voice sounded wrong, but because of what it was saying. The voice itself was completely, entirely recognizably his wife, not an approximation, not close, her. The specific quality of her voice that he has heard every day for 11 years of marriage, the way her vowels sit, the particular rhythm of her sentences, the sound she makes at the back of her throat when she's trying to hold something together. She sounded scared. Not panicked. He made this distinction carefully, and I think it matters. Panicked is a specific sound, and it's actually easier to fake because it's broad and general. What he heard was something more specific than panic. The controlled, careful fear of someone who is frightened, but is trying very hard to stay functional. The tight, measured voice of a person who is keeping it together by a thread and knows it. He had heard that voice before, in real situations, real moments, over 11 years. He knew exactly what it meant, and his body responded to it the way it always had, with immediate, total focus on whatever she needed. She told him their son had been hurt at school, that she was already at the hospital, that the insurance was being disputed. For some reason she didn't fully understand. Some administrative issue. And there was a fee that had to be paid before treatment could begin. A specific amount, a specific account number, she read to him carefully. A specific deadline that didn't leave much time. Could he transfer it now? She would explain everything when he got there. David said yes. Of course. He was already opening his banking app with one hand while she was still talking. $8,000. He had the account number. He was entering it. He said his brain was operating at about 20% of its normal capacity because the other 80% was already at the hospital, already parking the car, already walking through the entrance, looking for her and their son. The kind of mental displacement that happens when someone you love is in danger and your body is still somewhere else. He was at his desk, but he wasn't at his desk. His thumb was over the confirm button, and something stopped him. He has described this moment to me carefully, more than once, because he knows it's the moment that everything turned on and he wants to understand it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't anything she said. It wasn't a technical glitch in the voice, or a strange pause, or a word that felt out of place. It was a detail. Small, quiet. The kind of thing that arrives in the back of your mind, not as a thought, but as a feeling of slight wrongness, the cognitive equivalent of a stone in your shoe that you haven't identified yet, but that is making every step slightly uncomfortable. She had named a hospital, a specific hospital, by name, with apparent familiarity, the way you'd name a place you were already standing in, the way you'd reference somewhere that needed no explanation. And some part of David's brain, some automatic background process that was running underneath the fear and the urgency, and the open banking app did the geography. The hospital she named was 40 minutes from their son's school, not in the wrong direction in an obvious way. not across town, not in another city. 40 minutes. In a direction that was wrong, but not impossibly wrong, the kind of wrong that has explanations. Referrals, transfers, ambulances, taking specific routes. But wrong. 40 minutes wrong when the right answer was 12 minutes. He stood on the edge of that detail for what he describes as about 2 seconds. 2 seconds of his thumb over the confirm button. Then he took his thumb off. He said to her, "I'm going to call the school quickly, just to let them know. I'll call you right back in 2 minutes." And she said, and this is the moment he comes back to most often, the moment that lives in him, she said, "David, there isn't time." Not his name as reassurance, not his name as connection, his name as pressure, as a tool, deployed with the specific, intimate familiarity of someone who knows exactly how much weight that name carries in that voice, in that mouth, directed at him. He hung up. He called the school. His son was in 5th period math. Completely fine. No incident of any kind. He called his wife's number, the same number that had just called him, which his phone showed as her number, which had shown her contact photo when it rang, and it went directly to voicemail, her recorded voice, telling him to leave a message. He called her office number. She picked up on the second ring. She was at her desk. She'd been in a meeting most of the afternoon. She hadn't called him. She didn't know what he was talking about. She said his name the way she actually says his name, not as a tool, as a question, because he sounded strange and she was concerned. He sat in his car in the parking lot. He doesn't remember walking to the parking lot. He was at his desk, and then he was in his car, and he sat there for a long time. The investigation that followed was thorough. His wife's number had been spoofed, a technical process that routes a call through systems that falsify the originating number, making it appear on the recipient's phone as a number. It isn't. This is not new technology. It is, investigators told him, increasingly simple and cheap to execute. The voice had been cloned, built from recordings collected across multiple platforms, videos his wife had posted, videos she appeared in that others had posted and tagged, clips from a local news segment she'd been briefly included in 2 years ago, a podcast interview she'd given for work 18 months earlier, public material, all of it, available to anyone who looked. But here is where the investigators kept stopping. Here is what they kept returning to in their conversations with David. What they told him was the part that concerned them, beyond the technical execution. The hospital. Think about what choosing that hospital required. It required knowing the city David and his family lived in. It required knowing the specific neighborhood. It required knowing which school their son attended, not just the school district, not just the general area, the specific school. It required understanding the geography well enough to select a hospital that was plausible, close enough to be believable, specific enough to feel real. It required, in other words, research, not casual research, not the kind of research you do in 20 minutes, the kind of research you do when you've decided to study someone, when you have looked at their social media and their public records, and their tagged locations and their check-ins and the backgrounds of their photographs, and you have built a picture of their life, their neighborhood, their routines, their son's school, the hospitals in the area and which one a frightened mother would plausibly be calling from. And then, and this is the part that the investigators flagged, the part that David told me he thinks about in the dark, they got it slightly wrong. 40 minutes instead of 12. A mistake. A small, specific, correctable mistake in an otherwise precise and carefully constructed operation. David sat with that word for a long time. Correctable. He told me what he thinks about when he tries to understand what happened to his. The voice wasn't close, he said. It wasn't almost her. It was her. The way she sounds when she's scared, the specific way, the particular way, that I know from 11 years that was in there. That's not something you get from a press conference or a podcast. That's something you get from private moments, from knowing someone, which means they didn't just have recordings of her talking. They had recordings of her feeling something, real feelings, captured somewhere, somehow. He stops. I've gone through every video she's ever posted, every video anyone else has posted that she's in. I've watched all of it, trying to find the moments where she sounds like that, where she sounds scared or upset or emotional in that specific way. And I've found a few moments she didn't know were being recorded, or knew but forgot. Moments that look ordinary from the outside, but that contain the specific emotional register they needed. Someone found those moments. Someone collected them. Someone listened to them enough times to understand how to replicate them. He's quiet for a moment. I don't know when they started watching us. I've gone back through the last 2 years trying to find the beginning, the moment when we became a target, when someone decided to study us, and I can't find it. There's no moment. There's no event. There's no post or interaction or anything I can point to and say, that's when it started. Which means either they were very careful about not leaving traces, or they started so long ago that I'm not looking back far enough. He looks at me, and the hospital was 40 minutes wrong. Not 10, not 5, 40, which is a real error. Which means somewhere in their research, somewhere in however long they spent building their picture of my family, they made one miscalculation. One. And it was the only thing that stopped me. He doesn't say anything for a long time. Then he says the thing he told me he doesn't say out loud often because of what it implies. They know it was wrong now. They know because it didn't work. And whatever they do next with us or with someone else, with some other family in some other parking lot on some other Thursday afternoon, they'll have corrected it. The next version of this will be 12 minutes away, not 40. The next version of this will be perfect. And I don't know whose name will be on the phone when it rings, but I know it will sound exactly right. The investigation is ongoing. David still doesn't know who did this to his family. He still doesn't know when they started watching. He still doesn't know if they've moved on or if they're still there. Somewhere in the background of his family's life, correcting the error, building the next version. He goes to work on Thursday afternoons. His phone sits on his desk, and every time it lights up with his wife's name, every single time he says, there's a moment, just a moment, before he answers. I want to end with this one. I've read hundreds of submissions this year. I've thought about a lot of them, but this is the one I come back to. This is the one that changed something in the way I think about what's coming. A man I'll call David was at his desk at work on a Thursday afternoon. Ordinary day, mid-afternoon. Nothing unusual when his phone lit up. His wife's name, her number. He answered and heard her voice. She sounded scared. Not panicked scared in the specific, controlled way that she gets scared, the way David had seen dozens of times over the years of their marriage. The careful, tight-throated voice of someone trying to stay calm while something terrible is happening. She told him their son had been hurt at school, that she was already at the hospital, that the insurance was being disputed for some reason, and there was a fee that needed to be paid immediately to begin treatment. Could he transfer it now? She would explain everything when he got there. David said yes. Of course. How much? $8,000. He opened his banking app. He had the account number she gave him. His hands were moving. He said his brain was barely engaged. He was already mentally in the car, already driving to the hospital, already thinking about his son. His thumb was over the confirm button, and something stopped him. He's never been fully able to explain what it was. Not a sound, not a word, she said. A detail small, quiet, easy to miss that arrived in the back of his mind and just sat there. She had mentioned the hospital by name, a specific one. And as David's thumb hovered over that button, some part of him did the math automatically and understood that the hospital she named was 40 minutes in the wrong direction from their son's school. It wasn't impossible. Maybe there had been a transfer or a referral, but it was wrong. Slightly, quietly, specifically wrong. He took his thumb off the button. He said, "I'm going to call the school quickly, just to let them know, and then I'll send it. I'll call you back in 2 minutes." She said, "David, there isn't time." He hung up. He called his wife's number, the same number that had just called him, and it went to voicemail. He called the school. His son was in fifth period. Completely fine. No incident. He called his wife on her work number. She was at her desk. She hadn't called him. She didn't know what he was talking about. David sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time. The investigation that followed taught him several things. His wife's number had been spoofed. The voice had been cloned using recordings gathered from social media videos she'd posted publicly, videos she appeared in that others had posted. But what the investigators kept returning to what concerned them most was the detail. The hospital, not a generic hospital, a specific one. One that would have been a plausible choice, close enough to seem reasonable, just slightly wrong if you knew the geography well enough. The fact that whoever built this scenario knew which hospital to choose meant they knew where David's son went to school. They knew the area. They had done research on his family. And the fact that it was 40 minutes off, not 10 minutes, may have been an error. A small mistake in an otherwise precise operation. Which means without that mistake, David would have pressed confirm. He told me what he thinks about. Not the money. Not the voice. Not the spoofed number. He thinks about the preparation. To get her voice that accurate, the emotional register. Not just the sound. They needed a lot of recordings. Real ones. Candid ones. The kind where she's actually feeling something. And to know the hospital. To know the school. To know the geography they'd been watching us. Not for a day. For long enough to build a picture. I don't know when they started. I go back through the last year, and I try to find the moment when someone decided to study us. And I can't find it. Because they were careful. They were patient. And they almost got it perfect. One small mistake in what was otherwise a perfect plan. He stops for a long time. What happens to the families where there's no mistake? The investigation is still ongoing. David still doesn't know who did it. He still doesn't know how long they were watching. And somewhere out there, whoever did this learned from it. They identified the mistake. And they're preparing to try again with the mistake corrected. 2025 proved something that I think a lot of us didn't want to accept. The most frightening thing isn't the monster you don't recognize. It's the one wearing a face you trust. A voice you've known your whole life. A home that was never empty. A device in your pocket that recorded every step you took. If any of these stories happen to you, or if you have something from 2025 that you think belongs on this list, send it to me. The address is in the description. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.